Hello everybody, today on the channel the long-awaited update on this, my Ferrari 430 Scuderia. You haven't seen this car for quite some time, and the reason for that is simple. I haven't seen it for quite some time. I dropped it off at Meridian Modena just before Christmas to get its first service under my ownership done, and also to rectify a few issues that I knew that the car had. As the work was completed just before I was due to go on holiday, rather than have it sitting on the driveway going nowhere or languishing in storage, I offered it to my friend Damien from the Car Guys, who recently has been doing a series called Drive Every Ferrari. And as he hadn't featured a 430 Scuderia, and I believe it's a car that really deserves reappraisal, I said to him if he'd want to have it, and happily he said yes. So, the last video on this car was actually made by him, and it was, I think, a very fair, balanced, and most certainly unbiased piece on the 430 Scuderia, comparing it with his own 360 Challenge Stradale, a car that I think really does overshadow the Scuderia. And I am of course delighted the car is now back on my driveway. But, as is now customary, its first visit to the main dealer did produce a bill that was a little bit bigger than the one I was anticipating. That's not entirely true. It was quite a bit bigger than I was anticipating, and this is the kind of bill that does make one ponder whether you've made the right decision or not. So, before I take you through that bill, time instead to take the car out and remind myself why I persevere with it. Today's episode of Man Maths is brought to you by CarVertical. They've recently had a bit of a rebrand, new mascots, new colours, and a new format for their reports, making them even easier to read, but still containing all the important information you want to know when buying a used car. Find out about previous accident damage, potential clocking, outstanding finance, and other possible red flags before you purchase by using CarVertical. All you need is a reg number or VIN plate, and for 10% off, just use my discount code JAYEMM. Regular followers of the channel will know that this is not my first 430 Scuderia. That was a Grigio Silverstone example that I picked up from Dick Lovett Swindon. Unfortunately, that car had a few persistent issues, and though I did have a very good time in it, took it on a few different trips up to Scotland and did a whole bunch of stuff with it, it wound up getting to the point where it was spending more time at Dick Lovett than it was with me, and that got just a little bit boring. They eventually agreed that they were not going to be able to solve the problem, and so they bought the car back, and that put me back essentially in the position I'd been before I'd got the car. As I was then without a supercar, I did want something kind of supercar shaped to replace it, and I did consider buying, say, an Aston Martin, Vantage, Vanquish or the like, but they weren't supercars and didn't do enough different to things I already had. And I did consider the likes of Lamborghini Gallardos, Huracans, Aventadors, Diablos, a bunch of different McLarens, and other Ferraris too, but each and every one had something that I felt was missing that I got with the 430 Scuderia. And so, after a few months, I realised the only thing that could truly replace the 430 Scuderia that I could also afford was another 430 Scuderia. I picked this one up from a specialist supercar dealer, not a Ferrari main dealer. They mostly sell Lamborghinis, and it has an incredible specification. Compared with the previous one, this is a little bit newer. It's a 2010 rather than a 2008. It's in Nero Daytona rather than Grigio Silverstone, so black rather than grey, and though neither of those would have been my first choice, I actually do kind of like them. Nero Daytona in particular, when it's clean, which is rare, and when it's sunny, which is also rare, it's a spectacular shade. Has quite a bit of metallic in it, including some gold, some coppers, various different things, so it's a more interesting shade in person than it is in pictures. Unfortunately for you, when you get to see this car, it's mostly in picture form, so sorry about that. had I had the choice, I would have certainly gone for something a little airier. That's me. But there were also some bonus extras from the options list. It had the things I deemed essential in a Scuderia, like the carbon fiber steering wheel with LEDs that just about every single one has, but also the roll hoop and the harnesses. These to me really add to the Scuderia driving experience. They create a bit of theatre with the car, and it's something I really do like about the Scud. However, this one also had just about every single piece of optional carbon fibre that you could get, including the front lip, the headlights, the side skirt, the diffuser, and the cover for the engine, which has been painted so thin you can see the carbon weave through it. And that's got to get just about any petrolhead a little bit excited. Real shades of F40 there. Unfortunately, not all that long after picking the car up, I discovered that it did have a few issues, including, most annoyingly, the one that wound up making me return the last one, which is a suspension knock. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but you may still be able to hear it because at the present time, it is still there. The car has gone off to centre gravity, and I made a video about that on my second channel, JAYEMM FRIENDS, where we looked at the problem in basic form. We have done a little bit of work, but I'll explain later why we haven't got there yet and why you haven't seen a part 2 of that video. And I'll be totally honest, the sole reason that that hasn't happened yet, why we haven't done the work, is me. My schedule has been all over the place. I've had some personal stuff going on, particularly in the last half of last year, various other things, and to get the car up to centre gravity, who need it for at least, I think, a couple of days, I just haven't been able to find the time. I've got the parts, we've got everything ready to go, and it is now booked in. But when I did start to get a little bit of free time, I realised this car actually was approaching its service deadline. Though in terms of mileage, it was still some way short. In terms of time, it was just about due, and I do not like to skimp on servicing when it comes to anything like this. But I'm going to talk through all of that in a little bit. Right now, what I said I wanted to do is remind myself of why I bought this car and whether I've made the right decision. In fact, before you've even taken it out, before you've hit that big red engine start button, the Scuderia is a car that makes you feel really, truly special. This one in particular, with the harnesses, the specification of it, you open the door, you're greeted with this acreage of carbon fibre, then you slot yourself in, you get set up, you get ready. There's a whole element of theatre about this car. The view out then is pure, simple supercar. You have these beautiful haunches on either side, this amazing visibility, which is so much better than in that of many a Lamborghini. There's a lot of air in this cabin, it feels like. And one of my favorite things about a lot of Ferraris of this era, you can drop a window and you barely get any buffeting. This is how I like to drive these things. It's a wonderful way to do it. I suppose for the ultimate wind in the hair experience, you could buy a 16M, but I have a suspicion that's going to be dynamically very compromised, and to me, this gives me just about everything that you'd really want from a car like this. However, you don't buy it just to pose around town and get a little bit of wind in the hair, do you? No. You buy it for the way that it makes you feel when you put your foot down. So, let's talk about that. For me, the 430 Scuderia is really peak analog supercar. In just about any measurable way, the 458 Italia, let alone the Speciale, is a better car. Faster, tauter, superior in any single way that you can put a number to. But this is all about the drama, all about the theatre. I mentioned a very similar thing in a review that I filmed yesterday. I'm not sure which video is going to come out first, where I drove an F430 Spider. And this gives you all the sensation of that, but just dialed up to 10. after we'd filmed that review, I let the car's owner, Paul, take this out for a spin and see how he felt the two compared, because he, like myself, was a little bit skeptical as to how different the Scuderia could really be. A really nice, decent F430 coupe is £100,000. One of these is another 75 on top. It's a lot of money. But I think there are enough changes in here that really do make it worth the extra money. If you're interested in knowing more about those, I've made whole videos dedicated to the topic, but the fact is, every single gripe I have with the F430 is kind of fixed here. Don't like the looks so much. This is sharper, a little meaner, a little tauter looking. The handling, I felt, was just a little bit shy of what I want from a Ferrari. This is a faster steering rack, grippier tyres, more aggressive suspension setup, and I think it is just a stunning piece of kit. I don't love every element of it. I think the noise is awful. It's just a racket, but better actually in many ways than some other cars. However, the big deal for me is that when you finally get yourself on that nice open stretch of road, you put your foot down, it just comes alive, this car. Even better though, when you're not on said stretch of road, you're where I am now, following a Ford Cougar, and it's not a suitable overtaking spot, you can chill out, relax, press the bumpy road mode button. This was the first car to have that, and that means that actually, though it is a sort of hardcore stripped out thing with no carpets, it's quite comfortable, it's quite pleasant. I drove a Maserati MC20 the other day, and in many ways that was a car that really impressed. Unbelievably quick, I think good looking, and it has billionaire doors, but doesn't have the soundtrack of this. Even in its current guise, this is certainly a much better sounding car. The Maserati was devastatingly fast, but this is already fast enough. And the Maserati, despite its carbon tub, weighs 1,660 kilos in the real world. This 1,400 kilos. That's a quarter of a ton, and you really do notice it. This is a far more supple thing. The steering here, I think, is just that little bit more talkative, that little bit more engaging and exciting, and this has a much bigger boot than the Maserati as well, so it's actually a far more practical and usable car, despite the fact that this is the one with the stripped out carpets and the hardcore ethos. You wouldn't really expect it to be that way around, but it is. And this is certainly still more than quick enough to put a smile on your face. And there's that gearbox. This car came exclusively with Ferrari's F1 automated manual paddle shift, here dubbed F1 Superfast 2. This was a new development for the Scuderia, and it dropped the shift time from 150 milliseconds in the regular F430 to 60. But as numbers can often be either meaningless or outright deceitful, let me show you the difference between a regular F430's F1 box and the Scuderia's. This is what a Scuderia shifts like. Big difference. And it's a huge amount of fun. In fact, just about everybody who's driven this car has come back saying, the gearbox. That gearbox is everything. I know there are people out there that put manuals in these, and I kind of get it, and in a Challenge Stradale, I'd absolutely do that. The F1 box in those just isn't up to scratch. But here, nothing could be further from the truth. It's so good. And this is the thing. You're now dialed in. I'm doing road legal speeds. I'm doing 60 mile an hour, pretty much exactly. And you just play with the car, play with the gearbox. Beautifully sized for this road. Oh, yes. But I did mention there were a few issues with the car. First up, it just needed a service. Just normal, ordinary, routine, boring service. What other issues were there? Well, I didn't think there were all that many. The main one was that the car seemed to have some fairly serious vibration, particularly at idle. These will always have an element of that. It's just the way that they are. It's part of the car's character. But compared to the old one, this was really quite extreme.
I've also known for a little while that my exhaust is going to need some replacement. Every now and again you just get a tiny little bit of powder out of it. I've barely seen it. I think only once I've actually spotted it doing it, but it's just a thing that happens to them. Over time the welds kind of give up, and that's sort of it. Beyond that, I'd hoped I was going to be able to kind of get away with it. I figured about £3,000 to £4,000 maybe, and the service is going to be 1,500 quid, and I gathered that the car might need some engine or gearbox mounts, and they're usually sort of £1,000 or so, give or take, depending on how bad they are to buy and also to fit. But I thought about 3 to 4 grand was going to do it. I was wrong. Very wrong. Why? Well, let's pull over and talk you through it. Okay then, so here is the first email I received back from Meridian once they had gone over the car, summarising all the things that they had found, and it's a big one. There were 25 different points, and in order they are: both front lower outer suspension joint gaiters are split. To repair that, between £690 and £830, including VAT. One of the reasons I love taking the car to Meridian is that when they go over anything, they look at it, they send me back a nice organised list of everything, and they tell me what each part costs to fix in terms of both parts cost and labour as well, and they'll also give me the part numbers too, which means that if I want, I can double check that they're quoting me a good price, and if there's an alternative, I can seek that out as well. Provided the part is OE quality, Meridian are happy to fit it, the proviso being, of course, if that part fails or something goes wrong, it's on me. And to be fair, most of the time the prices they quote are actually pretty good. In fact, a number of times they've been better on part pricing than many other well-known third-party specialists. So, point number 2, both rear track rod end covers split. The boots are part of the track rods, and their first guess is £850, including VAT, which is about £500 for the parts, and then the rest is labour. But if the track rods are seized, I need to replace the whole thing, and that's going to be about another £1,000 on top. They do note that they have seen some non-genuine just rubber boots. Ferrari won't sell you just the boot on its own, and it's only the boot that they think I need. However, they're not 100% certain if they'll fit or not. Point 3 and 4 are also suspension related. They are slight play in the offside front lower shock absorber bush, which I already know about, and centre gravity had already detected. Talk about that in a bit. And then slight play in the near side front lower outer joint, but they think it's not anywhere near bad enough to warrant replacement just yet. Then we get to some of the big stuff, and this one here is the biggest thing of all. Core plug on water pump leaking coolant. He said it's a fairly common issue, and the core plug is not the problem itself. There's a seal inside the pump which lets coolant escape, and it gets into an empty cavity in the pump, which is then sealed by the core plug, and that's how it gets out. And that, £2,500. That's about £1,560 for the part, and the rest is labour. The power steering rad is leaking. That's £932, although of that, only 180 quid is the part. £180 for a new radiator on a Ferrari, I think is not that bad. The rear exhaust silencer clamps are not the correct fitment, and they recommend replacing for the correct type, which is about £120, because they use a Maserati part, which is exactly the same, but cheaper. They note that the front brake pads are getting low. I'm still on 6mm, so they say they've got quite a bit still remaining, and the wear indicators will show long before the pads are out of life. Those are just under £1,000. One of my tyres at the back does have 2 puncture repairs in it, which I know about already. They've got plenty of tread, 4 to 4.5mm, which on a Cup 2 is quite a bit. Both door strikers are missing the inserts, common issue. It's £60. Then the inlet manifold vacuum solenoid is stuck. They've lubricated it and it's working fine. They didn't charge me for that. Trim fitment behind the seats is not fitted correctly. I'm not exactly sure which bit they're referring to. I think it's just the big kind of bit back here, but I've got some stuff I might do in the near future that means that's going to come out anyway, so I'm not worried about that. And they said it could be as simple as a 5-minute job, for which they're basically not going to charge me. The offside right inner light, I noticed that it was wobbling a little bit. Very well known failure point with 430s. It's broken. basically. And I have subsequently also noticed that the outer one on the left-hand side is also really, really wobbly, and I am going to look into that as well. The front under tray has worn through on a couple of the fixing points. They recommend a repair of it, not replacement, at £200. And then both cam cover gaskets are leaking oil onto the exhaust manifold, just under £1,000 to sort that between labour and parts, mostly labour. The car was fitted with an aftermarket exhaust manifold, which was causing errors generated within the ECU. Wasn't displaying a warning light, but it wasn't quite happy that that was fitted. The rubbers for the fuel flap were missing. That's £30. My emergency tyre foam is missing, which is £220. The engine lid was rattling. They fixed that free of charge. I did also have another problem I forgot to mention to you. This is quite a funny one. The car won't stay on high beam. You put high beam on, and if you knock it in even the slightest way, or go over a tiny bump, it knocks itself off. Unfortunately, that can only be fixed apparently by replacing the stalk, and you can't get them. Used units are available. I'm going to look into that. The steering column shroud here had kind of disintegrated, which they often do, and that's £400. There was a rattle from the driver's door. That was the glass runner coming loose, and they reckon 150 odd quid to £300 to fix that, depending on labour required. And then wiper blades were split, which I had noticed and mentioned to them. £1,605, which happily was a typo. They were about a tenth of that. Then the front brake pipes had a little bit of corrosion on them, but it was just surface corrosion. So they've cleaned them off, put a bit of grease on to protect them. And then they gave me several options for service, which was between £1,000 and £1,400, depending on exactly which service it needed. I said to them, don't do anything suspension related, and there's a few reasons for that. First off, I want everything suspension related to be done by centre gravity. Secondly, some of the parts prices quoted here I know I can improve upon. So the front outer suspension joint gaiter, for example, the parts that Meridian were quoting, and I need 4 of them. They were £322, including VAT for the 4. That's for all 4. I can get them for 19 quid from Hill Engineering. Likewise for the track rod end covers, if I do just want to replace the rubbers, I can get those, and they are £35 each, which is much cheaper than the £250 each that Meridian were quoting. And even worst case scenario, and I might actually do this just to be belt and braces, their worst case scenario of if you have to replace like the whole assembly, like the rod end and all the stuff it attaches to, I'm not very technical, am I? £1,700 just for the parts, I can get it for £700. So I may actually just do that, because that replaces everything and we'll get it all tip-top. I did say to them to do the water pump, because I think that's kind of important. I did say to do the power steering. I did say to do the silencer. Pads, I said I'd wait on. Tyres, I said I'd wait on, because tyres I will sort. Door strikers, I said, yes, please do that. Trim, I said, leave that. The lights at the back, I've said leave that, because I do believe that we can fix them without having to replace them. Replacement seems like a bit of a unnecessary move. It's actually only a small part that's broken. I'm talking with a few people at the minute to resolve that, and hopefully that'll be fairly easy. Fuel flap rubbers, I said yes on that. Tyre foam, I'm not worried about that. The steering column shroud, I said yes to that. I said yes to fixing the driver's door runner, the glass. I said yes to the wiper blades, provided you can get them for less than 1,600 quid. And I said do the biggest service that you possibly can. So they got to work. And of course, when you start digging with these things, you always find something else. So about a month later, I got another email, and they said they're making some good progress, but they took the cam covers off to sort those. And one of the reasons I said to do those was that from experience with the 550, if you let these things leak for too long, you may find out they start causing other issues elsewhere. I'm not sure how true that is for the 430, but it definitely is for the 550. So they said they've taken the cam covers off. They found a little bit of water in the oil, which could be because the car's been doing a lot of short runs, which it had. Could be because of poor quality engine oil or infrequent oil changes, which it shouldn't be, because the car has allegedly been serviced by Ferrari main dealers and at the correct intervals, certainly mileage-wise. Potentially a sticky thermostat or head gasket issues or the heat exchanger. They had another 430 Scuderia in a few years ago where the heat exchanger had failed and sprung a leak, so they had a look at that and it seemed okay. Head gaskets on these, pretty rare, so I really don't suspect it's that. Their recommendation was that we put a new thermostat in at 200 quid. 210 specifically. So I said, okay, let's do that. And perhaps inevitably, they said, well, now we've got the cam covers off. Some of the paint is beginning to fall off of it. Would you like them to be repainted? It's about 450 quid. So I said, yes, please do that. Car was then away for about another month, and eventually I got in the bill. So what was the total cost? So this is for repairing the underside of the car, doing the second year annual service, which includes pollen filter, oil filter, air filter. There's an auxiliary belt as well. 11.5 litres of oil in this car, by the way. They do the brakes, brake cleaner anyway, and they do screen wash, they do brake fluid, they do the gearbox oil, they do quite a bit, and they replace the batteries in the keys as well. That came to £1,100. I think these are ex-VAT prices. Fixing the under tray was £165. The MOT I had them do at the same time was £55. The leaky oil and water pump assembly, that came to £2,187. The oil radiator was £768. The camshaft covers, that wound up being about 800 quid. Getting the aftermarket valve controller out was 250 quid. It was £374 to fix the shroud up here. It was 250. So it was the 300 quid including VAT to fix the door rattles here. Wiper blades were £50 each. So 100 quid plus VAT. Exhaust, same 100 quid. Door strikers were the £20 that they had said. The thermostat was £174. And then, is there another page? No, there's not another page. Lucky me. And I also made sure that they did some bulbs. So I think there was one in the front luggage compartment had failed, which was really, really annoying. And then they also farmed out the repainting of the cam cover. Total spent on this car recently, £8,190 and 95 pence, which is a lot of money. And it's still not done. So, what is outstanding on this car? Let's first discuss the elephant in the room, the suspension. I took it off to centre gravity, which you may have already seen if you watched the video on JAYEMM Friends. We suspected it was track rods or tie rods. One of the two. Drop links, sorry, they're the same thing, aren't they? Track rods or drop links. We replaced all of those at the front, and it improved things, but it didn't entirely eliminate it. So we did a bit of further digging, and we realised that the lower bushes on the shock absorber were likely the cause. I got in the car, they manipulated some stuff, they pretty much recreated the exact sound that I was hearing, so I think that's what it is. We have those bushes, we have things ready to go. The cost of those parts, I've already spent like 200 odd quid with them, and it's going to be like another 200 quid. So that is hopefully going to be solvable and not horrendous. The lights at the rear are annoying. I'm kind of worried because at least one of them on the left is really loose. And I do want to fix those, so I'm going to try and get those tended to ASAP. But the other one that's been really bugging me are the lights at the front. They look awful. It's specific to the cars that have the carbon headlights. And the problem is really simple. The carbon inside, I think, gave up some sort of gas. Stuff happened inside, and all the muck you can see is on the inside of the headlight lens. Because people look at them and go, oh, I'll polish those, they'll be fine. No, they won't. The problem is inside. And to split those headlights is not easy. You essentially need to bake them to get the glue soft so you can get them apart, and there's a big risk involved, because basically you could just melt them. So most people don't want to touch them. Dealers don't want to touch them because they go, well, the lights work, so we don't want to do anything. The dealer who supplied this car said that they'd fix those as part of the deal. They didn't. They gave them a polish, which clearly didn't do anything. They look atrocious. But I have found a company called Prestige Refinishing who recently did some stuff for Harry Metcalf and his Testarossa, and they've recently done some headlights on a 430. So they know what they're doing, and they say they can fix that, and that's probably going to be about another £1,000. I'm hoping that at the back I'm going to be able to sort the lights out without having to replace them. That's probably going to be another few £100, and I'm going to have to spend another sort of probably 500-600 quid, maybe up to £1,000 at centre gravity. So by the time I am done, I will have spent 11,000 quid on this car. having bought it from a dealer. Now, what will I say about that? Well, don't buy a car from a specialist dealer in Kent that mostly sells Lamborghinis, because there were quite a few things wrong with this car that I'm pretty sure they knew were wrong with this car and kind of neglected, and when problems were raised, the attitude wasn't great. I essentially did a deal with them to get a little bit of cash back to fix stuff on the car, but that was like $2.5 grand. So, as you can tell, not anywhere near enough to fix the problems the car actually had. However, once it is done, I am going to be left with a really, really good example of a 430 Scuderia. And it is a car that I like quite a bit. I have said many, many times that really, the thing with Ferraris, you have to understand that all high-performance cars like this, there's a real trend at the minute for people to want to own cars like this and think that they can just get away with it and not lose any money. They want to buy a car for essentially investment and, you know, have something and 2-3 years later sell it for the same or make some money. I've never really thought that way. I've instead bought into cars and thought, okay, I know it's going to be expensive, I know it's going to cost me, but I want to buy something that's going to make me happy, and I'm going to be happy paying the money. I think that's the way to do it. When it comes to these things, these are luxury products, you know, they are essentially, you know, the ultimate toy. I know some people think calling it a toy is disrespectful, but that ultimately is what it is. And so, yeah, it's a huge amount of cash, but it will be really sorted. And I'd much prefer that than someone else go and get the car and find out it's got all these issues and not sort any of them. In the grand scheme of things, actually, most stuff with this car is pretty good. And ultimately, the thing with the car like this is that you have to realise, if you buy it and drive it, it's going to cost you money. If you buy it and you don't drive it, it's probably still going to cost you money. So the only choice you really have to make is, do you want to drive and enjoy your lovely car or not? And on that bombshell, I think, if you don't mind, I'm going to drive mine. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.